Did you just diagnose your PS5 and you have a bad RAM chip? Well, I'm going to show you how to pull a RAM chip from a donor PS5 board, reball it so it's ready to install in your console. Now some prerequisites. I'm going to assume that you already have a hot air station, a microscope, and a soldering iron. Without those, you won't be able to complete this task. Now let's move on to the things you're going to need to reball your RAM chip. You're going to need some 183 Celsius mechanic solder paste. You can use probably other solder paste, but I would recommend 183 Celsius. You're going to need a DDR6 stencil. And last but not least, you obviously need a PS5 donor board, or maybe buy the RAM chip from like AliExpress or somewhere online. Obviously can't reball unless you have a chip to reball. Now let's chase the fix. For this video, this is the RAM chip we are going to be reballing. First, we just want to clear off all of this paste that was on the chip that helps cool it down on the heatsink. Also, if you already have a soldering station, a hot air station, and a microscope, I would also presume that you have solder and flux on hand. The flux that I recommend is Surrey BS UHF-TF. It's basically the same thing as Amtech 213 flux. It's a really good flux. It's what I would recommend for this job. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flow some flux around this IC because I just want the solder to flow at the lowest temperature possible. As soon as this chip flows, we're good to take it up and we can move on to reballing it. Kick on the old fume extractor. I would always recommend doing this job without a nozzle if you can, because you're going to get more surface area with the heat. You want to heat the chip up completely evenly. All right, as you can see, our chip is ready to come up. Just reach under it, grab it. Boom, we got our RAM chip from our donor board. Now that our RAM chip is off the board, we are gonna go ahead and clean our solder pads. So the absolute best way to do this is put some flux down on the board while the board is still hot. Bring in your soldering iron to collect all that lead-free solder. We're kind of hovering over all of the pads with this big blob of solder. We don't really wanna touch those pads because we don't wanna lift them. Next, we wanna take our soldering wick and we're going to go ahead and clean all these pads so that they are super fresh and ready to accept the RAM chip. Perfect, 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 and boom. Last but not least, we're gonna take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and either a piece of paper towel or a Q-tip. We're just gonna go and clean up that area of all the old residual flux. Now we have a flat surface for our RAM to solder onto. Now onto our stencil. Now this stencil actually comes in 3 parts. It comes with the stencil itself, the platform for the chips, and then it comes with a magnet base so that, well, I'll show you in a few minutes. First, we're gonna set the magnet base off to the side. We're just gonna grab the actual base itself without the stencil, because we have to place the chip in a spot here in the stencil. So now that we've done that, we need to go ahead and clean up our chip and prep it for the stencil placement, and then we can go ahead and reball. So almost like repeating the process, we wanna go ahead and put some flux down on the chip, flow some leaded solder on these pads, basically mix that lead-free and leaded solder, collect all those balls so we can wick them flat, and then reball them with fresh solder balls. Now we're going to go ahead and wick all of these pads completely flat, just like that. Clean the chip, and obviously our chip is not 100% perfect. It's not like 100% clean, but you know what? Nothing is perfect. We want to just do our best to make this ready for our new solder balls. So my stencil is not clean, so we're going to go ahead and clean that real quick. Now, if your stencil is like filled with solder and some of the balls and you're just struggling to get it out, I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to get solder out of your stencil. Now, I came up with this method on my own. There's probably people online that have done it and shown it in videos. If not, I mean, it is what it is. Now I'm gonna hold the stencil with a pair of hemostats, and you can do this with a pair of tweezers if you want. But basically, we're going to take the hot air station, we're gonna hold it up to the stencil, melt all of the solder balls, and then smack it on the edge of our desk. That way, all the solder balls will be molten and ready to just fly out. Now, I know a lot of people may say, oh, this will ruin the stencil. Dude, I literally do this every day, and it works, and my stencils always work. So whatever, man, whatever works for me. All right, so let's clean it out. Stencil's perfectly clean. All right, so we want to line up the stencil as perfectly as we can in the corners. That way there's no overlapping, and oh, you can see all of our pads perfectly. And as you can see, there are no more solder balls lingering in any of these holes. Why? Because we cleaned it out perfectly. Now let's prep our solder paste. Now the way that I like to do this is I like to grab some solder paste here. This is way more than enough, and we're gonna put it on a piece of paper towel. And what this is gonna do is you can see that there's a ton of flux in this solder paste. We wanna dry out this paste as much as we can because it's gonna make our reballing experience that much better. So what you can do is you can go ahead and fold it over onto a dry part of your paper towel, just press it down, bring it back over, and you can see we dried it up a little bit. Then we're gonna bring it over and we're gonna do it again. You wanna do this just a couple of times, maybe 3, 4, 5 times, until it kind of looks like this. You can tell most of it's dried out, and this is exactly what we want. So we're gonna go ahead and take up some of this solder paste. Now we're going to take our magnet base, go ahead and plop our stencil on there. So now the magnet underneath is really strong and it's holding the stencil down to the chip. So what I like to do is kind of put off the chip to the side, and we're gonna go ahead and take our paste and we're gonna just drag it just like that, and then come back like that. We're gonna scrape it, drag it like that, and scrape it back. We're gonna do that for both sides here. Now my good friend Jacob recommended that you dip a cotton swab in some alcohol and go ahead and clean up this area right here, and boom, man, that's just gonna wet down that solder paste just a little bit more, and it's gonna make it to where it flows really, really nice. I always take a finger just to go over it to collect any loose solder paste, and now we know that our chip is ready to reflow. Now what I like to do is use some longer tweezers that are angled like this, so I can kind of hold down the stencil, because when I do reflow this, the stencil is going to like deform. We want the stencil to deform downward and not upward. So we're gonna hold this down while we reflow. Now we're using 360 Celsius for this reflow. As you can see, my technique is I'm kind of going back and forth here, and I'm pushing down on the stencil, bringing up the heat to it. We don't want to do it too fast. We want to kind of do it indirect. And I'm not going to cut this part of the video. We're gonna just do this 100% start to finish. Once you start seeing it flow, you know you're good. And then bring the heat up over here. You want to be general. You don't want to put just one, a little bit of heat in one area. All right. And as soon as they all flow, take the heat away, because that's all the heat you need. You just need those balls to form. Then I wait about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to remove the stencil. And as this thing has now cooled down, the balls have formed, we're going to go ahead and remove the stencil. Go ahead and get underneath this chip and pull it right out. And as you can see, our RAM chip is completely uniform and ready to bond with our board. Now, before we install our chip, we're gonna put a little bit of flux down in this area. It is way more than enough flux, but we're gonna go ahead and just put that flux right into the board. And the goal here on this RAM chip, as you can see, this little triangle is pointing to where pin number 1 is on the chip. And when we look at our chip, we can tell that this triangle is going to match up with this triangle. So the chip is literally gonna go just like this. Now what we want to do is go ahead and cover up these 4 little squares, and that will tell us that the chip is 100% perfectly uniform to the pads that it's going to be soldering to. And to be honest, this chip doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to be as close as possible, because surface tension is actually going to bond this chip to all the pads. I'm going to try to bring in my no nozzled hot air station, and hopefully we can get this thing to bond. And in this case, I'm going to be using 360 Celsius to bond it, because the board is pretty thick, and if we push the chip just a little bit, that's it. That's all we need. So if you made it this far, congratulations, you reballed your own RAM chip on your PS5. But if you want to see me reball an even larger chip, the APU on a Nintendo Switch, you can find that video right here.
Hey Daddy, can you reball all 8 chips?
All 8?
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to do that for another video. We'll see you later.
We'll see you later. Bye-bye.